Welcome to IMPACTX 2050. Our community curates impact investment and innovation trends globally in EdTech, health tech, and food tech. Every week, we put the spotlight on innovators and investors to listen to their impact stories. Profitable, sustainable, inclusive, and innovative is how we define impact. So what's your definition? Coming up now is our next guest. Enjoy.
My name is Phil Cutler. I am from Montreal, Quebec in Canada, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer at Paper, which is an online platform that works directly with K-12 public school districts to support their students and help them reach their potential.
Phil Cutler, welcome. Welcome to IMPACTX 2050. Before we talk about your business, let me start with a personal question. Is there a defining someone in your life or in your education that basically led you to found an EdTech business?
So I'm not sure if I would say there's a specific individual. I think I've drawn from a number of different folks, and it really starts with my parents more than anything, and even my grandparents as well, who always put a huge importance on education, and access to education was always something that was prioritized in our home. So I like to think that they were a really critical part of my decision to get involved in education in the first place, and then ultimately in EdTech.
Tell us about the company's origin. I mean, I understand you were a teacher before, and you're part of the Teacherpreneur Club, which is a small club. Tell us about the origin of the company.
So I started my career as a classroom teacher, and what I had recognized when I was spending time in the class teaching was that I had students who were going out and hiring private tutors. But those were typically students who were actually doing well. It was just the families who had the most money that could afford to get that extra support. And it was clear to me that those students often didn't really need it, but they were using that as a resource to get ahead. When in reality, it was the other 80 to 90% of students who could benefit from that support, but didn't have the resources to get it. The expectation that schools have of teachers, of course, is that you assess every student the same and you treat them all equally. But I knew that the students didn't have the same access to resources. And so that felt highly unfair. And I wanted to try and find a way to solve that and level the playing field, ultimately create a resource or a platform that would give that other 80 to 90% of students the same quality of support that the families that could afford to spend a lot of money, $50, $60, $100 an hour, were getting.
Mm-hmm. So tell us how you solve that problem. Tell us about Paper and how it is unique and differentiated versus other tutoring platform.
The journey that we've had has been one that I think is a little bit unique in the sense that our goal was not to be an online tutoring platform, and Paper isn't a tutoring platform. It has a lot of different facets to it. Tutoring is one aspect to all of that, but really our goal is to close the educational equity gaps, right? And we're trying to do that by making students confident for life. And tutoring and the academic support piece is a critical part of that, but it's not the only thing that matters. And I think for me, having been a teacher and having been a tutor, it was a very natural entry point, and it was something that was obvious because I had seen it. But as I started to speak with students and teachers and administrators, it became very clear, and it was very evident to me that we needed to be thinking beyond just providing online tutoring. We needed to be also listening to what students' particular needs were in order to be the best version of themselves. And that goes above and beyond just a tutoring session.
And I read that your ambition is to deliver cost-effective, personalized, at-cost academic support. And do you feel this need is somehow the consequence of the public education system failing? And are you a fixer of that, or are you an enabler, a supporter, a competitor? How do you position yourself vis-a-vis the public or the state school system?
So there's aspects to our education system that have been relatively unchanged for hundreds of years, effectively, right? The idea that you have one teacher standing in front of a class with dozens of students. I mean, this predates anything that, me being a teacher or my life. And it was designed because that was the best way to educate as many people as possible, which makes sense. And to a certain degree, a lot of that model can still be applied today. What's different is that technology has actually enabled us to have a much more personalized resource for every student. And what we haven't really done, and I wouldn't say it's a failure of the education system, we're catching up right now, right? Like every industry, you go through these sort of transformational changes. So where we're at in education, particularly public education in the US, is that there is this investment being made right now to leverage technology to make the access to support and access to resources and ultimately differentiated for every student. That exists, but it's growing in ways that we hadn't seen particularly widespread in the past. So when that was being done, an example being like an IEP, you had one, two, three students in the class who had that type of personalized support. Today with technology, you can actually have that for every student in the class. And I think that's where everything is headed.
And tell us a little bit about the technology and I guess, the learning science behind a paper. Do you have, evidence of efficacy or, studies done at school district level that proves that, it works?
We do. And I think one of the things that we're really excited about is the fact that it's clear that when you use paper, whether it's the tutoring or review center, paper math, paper live, together the platform, we see students academically improve, right? The most recent study that came out said students are seeing a 0.77 GPA increase when they use paper. That's fantastic. I think the biggest, I don't think anybody's questioning the quality of the support that's provided through the platform. The biggest challenge that we have is that it requires a bit of a change in behavior for students, right? The idea that they never had this type of support to having resources available to them 24/7 in unlimited capacity. That ultimately requires us to build as much awareness and start to create those habits with the students. And that's why listening to the students and what their needs are, the way that they're interacting with technology, why that's so important in our product development and our roadmap.
One of the massive challenge to sell to schools or to school district is, inertia. This is a slow process, despite, federal stimulus and money being available. How do you cope with this as an entrepreneur? Is that frustrating?
I think every industry has challenges. I don't think education has anything that's, above any other industry. In my view, the way that our school systems have actually responded to the pandemic has been quite positive. There's a challenge that was put in front of them. They were able to leverage the billions of dollars of federal stimulus money to buy devices and get students connected in really short order. This was an initiative that had been talked about for years, right? Let's get laptops in the hands of students. Let's use them in a really efficient way so that they can learn at home and so on. We talked about it, but the pandemic forced the hand. And I think that what's happened now is districts made those purchases, they made that investment, and now they can actually make all these sort of additional purchases, whether it's software or additional hardware, to better support their students because that initial investment has been made, has been rolled out. And ultimately, I think this is what students really prefer. Not that it replaces the in-class experience. There's a social component to that that's critical. But why not use all these technology and all these resources if it actually proves that there's impact that comes from it? Let's put it all together and package it up and say, hey, we've got the best resources available to our students.
Phil, what are you the most excited about right now in terms of, future product, roadmap? What's Paper 2030?
The biggest thing that we're seeing is that there's a huge shift in terms of how students are thinking about what happens after school when they graduate. And for the last couple decades, really, everybody has been pushed in this direction of going towards 4-year colleges. But that may not necessarily be the best track for every single person. And more importantly, it's actually not where people have been going, right? We see in a lot of our communities, 70% of our students not going to and graduating from 4-year colleges. A lot of them are going to vocational schools, to the military. They're going to technical schools to learn a trade. Some of them are going directly into the workforce. So there's a lot more interest there from our student base about how do the classes that they take in high school and even earlier, how do those translate into a career or life after school? And I think there's enormous shift that's coming in that regard where school districts are recognizing this. They're saying, wait a second, we don't think every student should be going to to a 4-year college and spending $300,000 to get a degree. Of course, that's great for some students, but we still need our welders. We still need our plumbers, right? So there's such an interest now in, okay, well, what's the best pathway for you as a student to be pursuing the right options for you post school when you graduate?
Understood, understood. And we hear a lot about two emerging trends in education or in EdTech: social learning and Eduverse, or education in the metaverse. Are they buzzwords for you? Is paper related to that? I mean, what's your view on those?
You know, I get asked questions like this often, and to me, it all depends on what the students are going to want and where they're going to be. We're not hearing that from our students right now. I mean, there's a lot that can be, a lot of times you see adults saying, hey, this is what students really want. And I think because of that, products get built in particular ways. We've kind of bucked that trend a little bit, and we've said, I don't know. Personally, I'm not the one who's going to know what's best for a 13-year-old. Why don't we ask the 13-year-olds, and why don't we build this in collaboration with them? So a lot of our roadmap has actually been designed in collaboration with students, and we're not hearing a lot of those buzzwordy type of of jargon that you might see elsewhere. We're not hearing it from the students the same way.
Good. Glad I got this reality check. Phil, I'm guess you are a lifelong learner.
I sure am.
What are you learning right now?
So that's a great question. Um, I'd say I go through these different waves of things that I get very, very interested in. Um, Obviously, from a professional perspective, you're always learning. And as CEO, I've had to develop an enormous amount. But I'll give you an example that has nothing to do with work. So during the pandemic, I got very into growing my own peppers. So
Hmm.
I've always liked hot sauce, and I've gotten pretty deep into this area. So this summer, I grew a whole bunch of different types of peppers, and I ended up with this really this beautiful habanero plant. And so we had hundreds of
Hmm.
habaneros, which are really hot. These ones were quite spicy. And so trying to figure out how to make the best hot sauces, how to use all of these peppers, along with some of the other peppers we grew. So I've been pretty deep in sort of hot sauce production for the last several months. I've been reading up on it. There's a lot of good content out there. There's a lot of people that are kind of like pepperheads that love this stuff. So that's really
That's
where I've been spending
that's
a lot of
amazing,
time.
amazing. I'm glad I asked the question. I think we should ask, instead of asking how are you today, we should ask what are you learning today, because we get much more interesting stories. That's a
Absolutely.
fascinating
People
story.
are really
Cool.
interested in things, right? And I say this often, but a lot of the times we realize we don't really love the concept of school because it comes with a lot of stress and some anxiety, and there's a lot of there's a lot of components to it that are not ideal for us. But we all love learning, and you'd be very hard pressed to find any student or adult who doesn't love learning something.
Just a quick question. Do you know Espelette peppers? It's a French pepper.
I don't. No. Tell me about it.
Okay, okay. Well, I'll send you a link on
All
it so
right.
you can try to grow it. Phil, a couple of rapid fire questions. You answer by A or B. You can't say both. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Teacher or technology?
Teacher.
State school or private school?
You got to go public education.
Okay. Degree or skills?
Skills, no question.
Remote work or every day in the office?
Remote.
Profit or impact?
Impact.
So you mentioned impact and equity a lot, today, but also in your interviews I read. How do you define impact?
Well, a lot of it is predicated on access. Students having resources that they didn't have before, and ultimately those resources helping them become more confident for life and reaching their own potential. So, in my eyes, when we look at impact and how we're supporting students or communities, it all has to do with, are more students getting access to resources that are helping them reach their potential?
Very good. Could you give me one prediction for the world of EdTech, for the knowledge economy? What would be your one prediction?
I think we're at an inflection point right now where there's a lot of technology that's available for students to use, for teachers to use, and we're going to see the creme de la creme sort of rise to the top. And those are going to become the next generation of trillion-dollar businesses. And some of them, this is going to be through mergers, acquisitions. They're going to build these things together. But we haven't really seen that emerge, and it's been decades, right? That all these other industries have had these enormous companies that have been formed. Education is due for somebody who's really going to disrupt and change it. So I do think we're heading in that direction. And again, this is more about the impact side of things than anything else.
Yeah. And do you have ambition to be a consolidator in the industry, or to grow internationally?
I think we all do if we're thinking about supporting students, right? There's students who need our resources and our support everywhere. So when I think about what's next for paper, it's really just reaching more students and reaching them in different ways.
Phil, one last question. Who would you nominate for our next story, and tell us why?
There's a great entrepreneur. It's in the higher ed space. Am I allowed to nominate someone in higher ed?
Of course,
Okay.
of course. Yeah, of course.
So Savvy started a company called Stellic, and I love what they're doing because essentially I had my own experience in university where I would go see those guidance counselors that would help you sort of map out the courses that you need to take to get your degree. And every single time I went, I would have a different person and they gave me completely different feedback, and I was always lost. I would leave way more confused than when I went in. They've built software that essentially streamlines a lot of this and helps students do a lot of discovery on their own. And so they're working with dozens and dozens of universities now. It's really impactful. He's got this incredible approach to how they're solving this problem. So they're a business I'm really excited for, and I think he's a great entrepreneur.
Okay, well, we will reach out. Phil, thank you very much for your time. This was Phil Cutler for ImpactX. Thank you very much.
Awesome.